The document discusses the concept of 15-minute cities, where people can access their daily needs within a 15-minute walk. It explores examples in Paris and Cleveland and addresses challenges like conspiracy theories.
You're listening to NPR Explains Climate Solutions. I'm Camila Domonoske. If we're going to reduce emissions and adapt to climate change, we have to reconsider our relationship with land, especially in urban areas. Coming up, the 15-minute solution that could transform our cities.
The result that many Americans find desirable, wow, isn't it wonderful? We go to Europe, we can walk, we can take the bus, we can take the train, etc., is a policy choice. It's not preordained.
Plus, new projects in California that are working with nature rather than trying to contain it. And a potential solution to an impending water crisis in the Philippines. Stay with us. We won't be able to reach our climate targets if our sprawling urban areas continue to grow as they have in the past, according to the Brookings Institution. One urban planning concept could offer a solution, and it all comes down to 15 minutes. Here's NPR's Aisha Roscoe speaking with NPR's climate solutions reporter, Julia Simon.
Where do we start?
We start in the neighborhood where I used to live, in Paris. So I am on my old Parisian street, a little cobblestone passage with vines covering the buildings, and I tried an experiment with my stopwatch and see where I can go by foot in 15 minutes. Let's go. Allons-y. In 1 minute, I made it to l'école maternelle, a preschool. I made it to a bookstore in 3 minutes, pharmacy in 4 minutes, the bakery in a little more than 5 minutes. Okay, I just had to get a baguette while I'm here. You're kidding me? Another park? All in a 15-minute walk. Aisha, what I experienced is a blueprint for a global climate solution called the 15-minute city.
So what does that mean?
It's a city where you can get the key things in your life in a 15-minute walk, bike ride, or transit ride from your home. On the banks of the Seine in Paris, I met the person behind the idea.
¿Eres colombiano?
Bueno, nací en Colombia, sí.
Ah, qué bien.
Carlos Moreno is Franco-Colombian. He's an urbanist. My old dense neighborhood was built more than a century ago, but Moreno's been helping the mayor of Paris foster these neighborhoods across the city. They're converting old military buildings, old parking structures into buildings with a mix of apartments, offices, businesses. They're building parks, hundreds of miles of protected bike lanes.
And so is this a climate solution because it reduces cars?
Yes, cars are nearly 10% of global energy-related carbon dioxide pollution. Moreno started in Paris, but this idea of ecological 15-minute cities is spreading across the world.
I saw a news article about this big phenomenon being created in Paris around the 15-minute city.
This is Justin Bibb, who is now the mayor of Cleveland.
I read up on it. I'm like, oh, the dots are connecting for me now.
He thought of when he studied abroad in London and would walk to class and walk to restaurants.
I thought about my childhood. I lived in a 15-minute city neighborhood at the time.
He thought, I want more of this for Cleveland. When he came into office last year, he got to work on it.
So how is he putting this into place?
Bibb's office immediately found there are lots of technical 15-minute cities in Cleveland, but the walk isn't so easy. There may be buses, but they don't run so frequently. So it's in the early stages of working on infrastructure, more public transit, sidewalks, bike lanes. But Aisha, there are some key obstacles for 15-minute cities. And the first one is conspiracy theories. To explain, we start in West Oxfordshire in the UK with County Councillor Duncan Enright. He's been trying to make what are essentially bus lanes. And last year, he was at this community meeting with some people he doesn't recognize.
Anyway, at a certain point in the meeting, one of them stood up and said, what about 15-minute cities? And to be honest, first, I never heard of that phrase.
It got agitated. Enright went over.
And they were explaining all about this theory about 15-minute cities, by which they meant you would only be able to travel 15 minutes from your home.
So what is this conspiracy theory exactly?
Basically, the false accusation is that a cabal of global elites will use 15-minute cities to limit people's movement and trap them in open-air prisons. Here's Enright.
And I explained to them that my job is to make travel easier so people can go wherever they like to find opportunity, jobs, education, not to stop people going more than 15 minutes.
So how did we get from bus lanes to this false idea about open-air prisons?
Misinformation around climate change used to focus on denying global warming. Now attacks focus on climate solutions. Often, the idea that climate change is this pretext for stripping people's civil liberties. Here's podcaster Joe Rogan last month.
You'll essentially be contained unless you get permission to leave.
Really? How are they going to put us in there?
The idea they're starting to roll out in Europe.
Last week, the Secretary of State for Transport in the UK used some of the language of 15-minute city conspiracies. It's getting mainstream.
So how do these conspiracy theories hinder the 15-minute cities?
Enright and his colleagues started getting death threats. Carlos Moreno got death threats too. Moreno says other researchers and scientists he knows have faced attacks, which makes them reluctant to publish about their work on climate solutions.
So are there obstacles that are specific to the U.S.?
Yes, zoning to build only single-family homes. Here's Jonathan Levine, professor of urban planning at University of Michigan.
Would I say that it's a problem? It's enormous. The single-family zone absolutely dominates residential land in all of our metropolitan areas.
Levine says single-family zoning traces back to policies of segregation. It reduces density because you can't fit as many people onto a lot with a house compared to an apartment. And all this zoning precludes establishing retail businesses, which make 15-minute cities possible.
All right, so what's the last big obstacle that you found for 15-minute cities?
Public schools. When urban U.S. couples have kids, they often leave cities for suburbs which they think have better schools. They kind of opt out of more sustainable urban living.
So, Julia, you have spent a lot of time thinking about 15-minute cities. How hopeful are you that the U.S. and other countries can actually achieve this?
It can feel like 15-minute cities are just inevitable in a place like Europe because Europeans have never been as car crazy as Americans. And Levine says, no, Europeans loved cars after World War II. The difference is they decided to move away from cars.
The result that many Americans find desirable, wow, isn't it wonderful? We go to Europe, we can walk, we can take the bus, is a policy choice. It's not preordained.
Seoul, Bogota, cities around the world have made policies to promote public transit and walking. We saw in the pandemic cities can transform away from cars quickly. But Moreno says how fast comes down to communities and political will.
That's NPR's Julia Simon. Julia, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you, Aisha.
Now to California's Central Valley, where the state's massive snowpack led to chronic flooding this year. The state needs to improve its aging flood infrastructure, but there's another land use innovation that's gaining traction: working with nature instead of trying to contain it. Here's NPR's Aisha Roscoe speaking with NPR climate desk correspondent Lauren Sommer.
What are the weaknesses in the state's flood infrastructure?
Yeah, there's just a lot of aging flood infrastructure out there that just isn't up to the job. That was the big lesson from the winter. And floods happened in two of the communities that suffered a lot of damage, which were Pajaro and Planada, because of levees that broke and hundreds of homes were damaged.
Does that mean levees need to be raised and improved on a really massive scale?
Yeah, there's a huge backlog of work that needs to be done. I mean, in the Central Valley alone, it's as much as $30 billion worth. But there is another option to prevent floods. And I'm going to take you to a community that really illustrates this. I went to Grayson, California, which is a small town in the Central Valley. And that's where I met John Mataka.
Naturally, when you live by the river, you're nervous when you see the water rising.
We're right on the edge of town where the last row of houses is, and the San Joaquin River is overflowing, just spreading beyond its banks. When other towns flooded this year, Mataka watched it closely because he knew it easily could have been his community. Like those towns, Grayson is home to farm workers, mostly lower income, and its infrastructure has been underfunded for decades.
It's not just farm workers and people that don't speak English living in these communities. We're people. We're human. We got needs, and you need to invest in our communities.
But even with all the water here this year, Mataka has felt a little bit better because of a new project that was invested in nearby.
I believe that it saved our community from some drastic flooding this year.
You can see it just upriver.
We'd love to see the floodwater on our property. We'd love to see it flood on our property.
John Carlin works at River Partners, a river restoration nonprofit. We're at a point where the river has spread across a huge area, and it's all on purpose. We head out in an aluminum boat to see it.
Very good.
Yeah, this was like a tomato field, and now it feels like we're out in the middle of Louisiana in a swamp somewhere.
The floodwater goes halfway up the cottonwood and willow trees around us.
We're looking back in time. We're looking at what this river used to look like 100 years ago.
This land used to be farm fields, but 10 years ago, River Partners began a restoration. They put in native plants and took down the levees and berms next to the river, so it would create a floodplain, basically giving the river some space when it needs it.
Rivers move, and that's a really hard concept for us, with property rights and roads and infrastructure.
The idea is that giving the river room up here will hold some of the floodwaters. So downstream, in towns like Grayson, the river isn't flowing quite as high.
All this water flow past populated areas. So you're taking that pressure off those downstream communities by moving the levees back up here.
It also creates some much-needed habitat for birds and endangered salmon. And the land is in the process of becoming California's next state park. Carlin says the hope is that these kind of projects take off because the idea is to work with nature instead of against it.
And Lauren, you're back with us through the magic of radio. Are these kind of floodplain projects to give rivers more space gaining traction in other places?
The Biden administration has really been pushing federal agencies to do more projects like this, especially because as the climate gets hotter, rainfall is just getting more intense, so rivers are having to handle these bigger flows. But, land is valuable, so it can be tough to put these projects together.
Right? People want waterfront properties. So do people have to move out of the way to create these floodplains?
Yeah, that can be the hurdle. It's easier to acquire the land in less populated areas, like the project I visited. But other projects have had to buy people out and relocate them. And there's another big challenge, which is regulatory. All the laws are in place to keep levees up forever. Don't move them, don't take them down. So these projects take a lot of time. But, the alternative is just to keep raising existing levees, which is very expensive. And so that's why these floodplain projects are really starting to take off.
That's Lauren Sommer from NPR's Climate Desk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
The Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world when it comes to climate change, according to the UN. In the capital, Manila, millions face an impending water shortage. In anticipation, a giant dam is being built in a nearby mountain range. Government officials hope that by changing the land, the dam will provide a necessary climate solution. But it's not without controversy. Here's NPR's Ashley Westerman.
Daraitan is a small touristy village a couple of hours outside of Manila, nestled in the mountains of Rizal Province on the Agus River. The village of about 5,000 residents is lush and green. This place is known as the home for the indigenous Dumagat people, most of them farmers whose families have lived off the land and the river for centuries. Families like Maria Clara Dulaces.
Bali po ang barangay Daraitan, Tanay Rizal.
She says the community is peaceful, and we have everything we need here. Dulas is the president of Dumagat Women of Sierra Madre. They have been fighting the building of the Kaliwa Dam for years, a project Philippine officials are hoping will alleviate the capital's impending water crisis.
Sa akin pong pagtingin,
the 230-foot dam's construction began last year, and though it will be built more than 6 miles upriver, Dulas says once completed, the new water flow will submerge her village.
Let's go.
It will also destroy their sacred lands, such as the white marble rock formations upriver.
Yung po yung pag may mga salot.
They perform rituals here, she says, rituals that protect the community from sickness and bad luck. But if the dam is built, all of this will be blasted away to increase the river's water flow.
Talaga pong masakit, nakakalungkot dahil simula bata po kami.
It hurts us. It's devastating, she says. But if the dam isn't built, officials say the water crisis will leave more than 13 million people without an adequate water supply starting next year. At Manila's Metropolitan Waterworks and Sewage System offices, supervising engineer Delphin Sispine says the region's exploding population is partially to blame. But there's another reason, the anticipation of the next El Niño, a naturally occurring weather pattern that has to do with the ocean getting warmer along the equatorial Pacific. How does El Niño affect the water supply?
Well, it will affect because there will be less rain for those dams that impound water for Metro Manila.
Yet while El Niño is expected, man-made climate change will exacerbate the effects of it. The United Nations says the Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries when it comes to climate change. Along with droughts, over the years, the archipelago nation has also seen sea level rise, ocean acidification, and more extreme weather events, such as devastating typhoons. But building the Kaliwa Dam is not a silver bullet solution to adapt to changing weather, says Angelo Carlos Torres de la Cruz with the Manila-based Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities.
It could have a role to play because it has scale, it's bankable, it can be invested on really quick. But that shouldn't happen at the expense of other equally important issues. For example, indigenous people's rights, forest and land degradation, and so on.
While dams are often billed as a drought protection measure and a renewable energy source, they have also been known to contribute to climate change and its effects. Dams can emit a lot of CO2 and methane because when dams form lakes, a lot of vegetation is smothered by the excess water and dies, releasing greenhouse gases. Dams can also intensify flash flooding by releasing too much water during big storms, and even drought by diverting water from rivers. Brian Eiler, the director of the Stemson Center's Southeast Asia program, says dams are just Band-Aids.
Because the weather is going to become so much more extreme to the point that it's hard to predict and design a dam for that future extremity.
But at the moment, no one is talking about these problems. Filipinos seem more distracted by how much the Kaliwa Dam will cost and that it's being financed by China. Experts there say this highlights the continual disjointed conversation about development in the Philippines. Because while climate change is not up for debate here, how to adapt to it and integrate it into the plans of the developing nation is. Back in Daraitan, Maria Clara Dulas doesn't feel like her community is being included in decisions about development or climate change adaptation at all. And while they aren't against progress, she says, they don't want their homes destroyed. The national government has offered the entire village the rough equivalent of a little over $1.4 million to relocate, Dulas says.
Bali po yung Kaliwa Dam.
We keep saying we don't want to benefit from the dam, she says. We just want what is ours, which is the land. For NPR News, I'm Ashley Westerman in Manila.
Coming up, it's your turn. How you can fit climate solutions into your life in ways that might surprise you. I'm Camila Domonoske, and this is NPR Explains Climate Solutions. Stay with us.